The pawn shop owner asked if I was George Avery, and when I said yes, he handed me the wristwatch I had accused a boy of stealing 15 years earlier. I was 62 then, living in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and retired from teaching high school shop classes long enough for my hands to stop smelling like sawdust. The pawn shop was not a place I usually went. I had stopped in because my neighbor collected old fishing reels and had asked me to look for a Penn model he claimed was better than anything made now. The owner was a heavy man with reading glasses hanging from a cord around his neck. "You George Avery?" he asked. "That depends who wants to know." He smiled like he had heard that answer from older men all week. "I got something with your name on it." From under the counter, he took a cracked leather case. Inside was a Hamilton watch with a scratched crystal and a brown band darkened by years of sweat. My watch. On the back were the words my first shop class had engraved for me. To Mr. Avery. Keep good time. I did not touch it at first. "Where did you get this?" I asked. "Estate lot. Mostly junk. This was in a cigar box with some old lodge pins." "Whose estate?" He looked at the tag. "Marion Voss." I did not know the name, but I knew that watch. It had disappeared from my classroom in 1996, right after spring conferences. A 17-year-old senior named Danny Rourke had been the last student near my desk. He denied taking it. I did not believe him. A week later, he stopped coming to school. For 15 years, I told myself a stolen watch was a small thing. Standing in that pawn shop, I realized small things can keep ticking long after you stop listening. Danny Rourke was not a bad kid. That is, what I should have understood first. He was late too often. He skipped assignments unless they involved tools. He wore the same army jacket through winter and spring, and he had a habit of looking at adults like he expected them to disappoint him before lunch. But he could cut a perfect dovetail joint by hand. And he once stayed after class to repair a chair leg for a secretary who had snapped at dragging furniture across the office. "He has more patience with wood than people," I told my wife Helen back then. She said, "Maybe it was been kinder." Helen saw people more clearly than I did. The watch disappeared on a Thursday afternoon. I remember the day because it rained hard enough to turn the baseball field into brown soup, and because Danny had stayed after class to finish a walnut toolbox he was making for the state competition. I left him alone in the shop for maybe 10 minutes while I went to front office. When I came back, my watch was gone from the corner of my desk. So was Danny. I found him by the bike rack, pulling up his hood. "Danny." He turned, already tired. "My watch is missing." He looked at my bare wrist. "I didn't take it." "I didn't say you did." "You didn't have to." The rain hit the pavement between us. I asked him to empty his pockets. That is the part one remembers most. Not the missing watch. Not the argument with his mother later. Just Danny standing there in the rain, jaw tight, pulling out a pencil stub, a folded bus transfer, a dime, and a nail set he had borrowed from the shop. No watch. I reported it anyway. Not to the police. I told myself I was being merciful. I told the principal. I told the guidance counselor. I told Danny's mother when she came in smelling like cigarettes and night shift exhaustion. Danny never forgave me. I cannot blame him. The pawn shop owner let me buy the watch for $35. That felt wrong too. Buying back a mistake at a discount. At home, I sat on the kitchen table and called Helen. We had divorced 7 years earlier, but still spoke on birthdays, furnace trouble, and the kind of news that did not belong to anyone else. She answered on the fourth ring. "I found my old watch." I said, "The class watch." "Yes." "Where?" "Pawn shop." She went quiet. After a moment, she said, "George, you need to find out how it got there." "I am trying." "No," she said. "I mean really find out. Not the way you did back then." That was Helen. She did not raise her voice when a clean cut would do. The pawn shop receipt listed Marion Voss's last address as a nursing home outside Marion. I called and learned she had died 3 months earlier at 89. No family nearby. Her belongings had been sold in one estate lot to settle expenses. Did she ever work at Jefferson High? I asked the administrator. No. She owned a motel on Old Highway 30. The Starline. That name touched a place in my memory I did not like. The Starline Motel sat near the edge of town, a low row of rooms with green doors and a sign shaped like a shooting star. Teachers joked about it because couples use it when they wanted to be forgotten. I had been there once. Not for that. At least not exactly. In 1996, 2 nights before the watch disappeared, I had gone to the Starline after a fight with Helen. We had been married 28 years and had reached that dangerous stage where two decent people can hurt each other without anyone raising a hand. I paid cash for a room because I did not want her seeing a charge on the bank statement and thinking the worst. What I did not remember was wearing the watch. I looked down at it on the table. The hands were stopped at 11 minutes after 9. The Starline Motel was gone by then. In its place stood a car wash with bright blue vacuums and a sign promising spotless results. I parked across the street and tried to match the new concrete to my memory. The office had been on the left. Rooms ran in an L shape. A soda machine stood under a tin awning and rattled whenever compressor kicked on. That night in 1996 came back in pieces. Helen and I had argued about my temper, not the kind that broke plates. Worse, maybe, the kind that made a house careful. I insisted I was fine. She said fine men did not make everyone measure their breathing. I drove until I saw the Starline sign. Marion Voss checked me in. She was a narrow woman with dyed black hair and a cardigan buttoned wrong. She gave me room 12 and a key attached to a plastic diamond. "You alone?" she asked. "Yes." "Then don't let loneliness make you stupid." I remember thinking motel clerks had no business being philosophers. The next clue came from the library. Old newspapers are patient. They sit there waiting for you to admit you need them. I searched Marion Voss and Starline Motel, then 1996. The first articles were ordinary. Zoning dispute, tax lien, a break-in at the vending machine. Then I found a small item from April. Local student injured near Starline Motel. Danny Rourke, 17, treated for minor injuries after being struck by an unknown vehicle while walking along Highway 30. No charges filed. The date was the same night I stayed there. My stomach tightened. I had not known about any accident. I printed the article and sat with it under the library lights. The report said Danny refused ambulance transport after treatment and left with an unidentified adult male. I read that line 3 times. Unidentified adult male. 2 nights later, I accused that same boy of stealing my watch. The old guidance counselor was still alive. Her name was June Ellison, and she had been old when I was young enough to think that meant harmless. She lived in a retirement apartment with crochet blankets on every chair and a television loud enough to make the walls blink. When I called, she remembered Danny right away. "Sweet boy," she said, tried hard not to show it. I found my watch. She did not ask what watch. That told me enough to sit down. "You knew something." I said, "I knew you were wrong." "Why didn't you tell me?" "I tried. I had no memory of that." She pointed to a folder on her coffee table before I even asked. Inside were copies of old notes, kept because June was the sort of woman who believed paperwork was a form of prayer. One note was dated the morning after Danny's accident. Student reported sleeping near Starline after conflict at home. Injured walking back. Teacher assisted. Student requested no contact with parent. Teacher assisted. I said, June watched me over the tops of her glasses. "That was you." "No, I would remember." "Would you?" I wanted to argue. Then she showed me the second note, written 2 days later. "Mr. Avery reports missing watch. Student denies theft. Concerned teacher may connect incident incorrectly." I rubbed my forehead. "What incident?" June's voice softened. "You came to school that Friday looking like you had not slept. You said you found Danny limping near the motel. You said you gave him your room because he had nowhere safe to go. Then you told me not to write that part down. I said that you were worried about your job. A teacher paying for a motel room for a student, even for a good reason, could be twisted." I stared at the carpet between my shoes. The first twist settled slowly, and it was worse than being fooled. Danny had not stolen my watch. I had given him the room, and somehow left the watch there myself. I drove home with June's notes on the passenger seat and shame sitting heavier than paper. Memory is not a courthouse record. I know that now. It edits to protect the person carrying it. Mine had kept the argument. The rain, Danny's pockets turned out in the cold. It had removed the part where I tried to do one decent thing and then punished the boy for knowing about it. Helen came over that evening. She did not take off her coat. She stood in my kitchen reading June's notes while the clock over the stove hummed louder than it should have. "I remember that week," she said. "Did I tell you about the motel?" "No. Did you know I blamed Danny because I was scared?" She folded the papers once. "I knew you were scared. I did not know of what." I looked at the watch line between us. Why didn't I remember helping him? Helen leaned against the counter. "Because helping him made you look at yourself. Accusing him let you look at him. That was not cruel. It was accurate." The next morning, I found Marion Voss's old motel ledgers at the County Historical Society. A volunteer brought them out in dusty banker's boxes and told me not to sneeze on the past. Room 12, March 26, 1996. Paid cash. My name. Below it, in Marion's handwriting. Boy stayed. Teacher slept in car. That line stopped me. I remembered the vinyl seat of my old Buick. I remembered waking with my neck stiff and dew on the windshield. I had not slept in the room. Danny had. Tucked between two pages was a torn maintenance slip. Watch found under bed. Kept in office. So Marion had the watch. Not Danny. The slip had one more line, written later in different ink. "Do not return yet. He will use it wrong." I did not know whether Marion meant me or someone else. But I was beginning to understand that a woman I barely remembered had known me better than I liked. Marion Voss had a friend named Edna Pike, the Historical Society volunteer. Found her name in Marion's obituary. Edna was still living in town, above a bakery, in an apartment that smelled like cinnamon and furniture polish. She had white hair cut short and hands that trembled until she picked up a teacup. Then they steadied. "You are the teacher," she said. "I am." "Marion said you would come late." I almost laughed. She said that? More than once. Edna opened a drawer and took out a cassette recorder, the small kind people use for reminders before phones started doing all our remembering. Marion lost her eyesight near the end. She recorded things instead of writing them down. She pressed play. Marion's voice sounded dry, amused, and tired. "If George Avery comes asking about the Hamilton watch, tell him I kept it because he was not ready to receive it. He had the look of a man who would turn proof into a weapon." I shut my eyes. The tape continued. The boy was not a thief. The boy was tired. The boy came to my office the morning after and offered to pay for the room with a toolbox he made. I told him his money was no good. George had already paid. Marion paused, cough. I found the watch after they were both gone. I saw George at the school 2 days later, angry and embarrassed, and I knew if I gave it back, then he would decide the boy took it after all. Some men prefer a guilty child to an uncertain mirror. Edna stopped the tape. "She liked you for what it is worth." That did not sound like it. She did not waste disappointment on people she thought were hopeless. I asked if Marion knew where Danny went. Edna looked toward the bakery window. She did, but she promised him quiet. "There is an envelope." Inside was not an address. It was a business card for Rourke Custom Cabinets in Duluth, Minnesota. On the back, Marion had written, "He learned to build things at last." I called 3 times before I left a message. "Danny, this is George Avery. I was your shop teacher. I owe you an apology about a watch." He called back the next evening. His voice was lower, steadier, but I knew it. "Mr. Avery." "Danny, been a while." "Yes." Silence held for a few seconds. "I found the watch," I said. "I figured you would someday." That sentence opened a door I did not expect. "You knew Marion had it?" "Yes." "Why didn't you tell me?" "You would not have believed me then." He said it without anger, which made it harder to hear. I flew to Minnesota in October. Danny met me at his cabinet shop, a brick building near the lake with the smell of maple dust in the air. He was 32 now, with a short beard and a pencil behind one ear, just like half the craftsmen I had known. He showed me his work before we spoke about the past. Cabinets with clean lines, tables smooth as still water, a cradle he was making for his sister's baby. You got good, I said. You got me started. I did not deserve that kindness. We sat in his office on two mismatched chairs. I placed the watch on his desk. I am sorry, I said. Not for the watch. For making you stand in the rain and empty your pockets. For deciding what kind of boy you were, because it was easier than looking at myself. Danny turned the watch over. Marion told me you slept in your car, so I could have the room. I had forgotten. I didn't. Then he told me the part Marion had not put on tape. He had come back to school planning to quit. After I accused him, he almost did something worse. Marion found him outside the motel that weekend and drove him to a woodworking shop in Dubuque owned by her cousin. She paid his first month's rent with money from her office coffee can. She said it was from you. Danny said, I looked up. It wasn't. I know that now. That was the second twist. Marion had not only hidden the watch to protect Danny from my suspicion, she had given him a future and let him believe for years that I had helped. I went back to Cedar Rapids carrying the watch, Danny's forgiveness, and a smaller opinion of my own memory. Helen came with me to Marion's grave the following spring. We found it in a cemetery behind a Lutheran church, under a tree that had dropped yellow petals across a stone. Marion Voss, beloved friend, keeper travelers. That fits, Helen said. I placed the Hamilton watch on the grass for a moment. Not as an offering exactly, more like evidence finally delivered to the right court. You were right about me, I told Marion. I would have used it wrong. Helen touched my sleeve. After that, I started writing letters. One to June Ellison, thanking her for keeping notes nobody had wanted. One to Edna Pike, who sent back a card with a recipe for molasses cookies and no explanation. One to Danny, though he had already said what mattered. Letters make a man choose his words without hiding behind tone. Danny wrote back near Christmas. Mr. Avery, you taught me how to sharpen a chisel and how to measure twice. Marion taught me people can be measured wrong the first time. I guess I needed both lessons. He signed to Danny, then crossed that out and wrote Daniel. I keep that letter in the same drawer as the watch. The watch runs now. A jeweler cleaned it, replaced a crystal, and told me it may lose a minute every few days. I told him that seemed fair. Sometimes I wear it when I visit schools to talk about woodworking. Not because I am proud of it, because it reminds me to slow down before I decide I understand someone. A few years ago, Daniel sent me a photograph of a walnut toolbox sitting on a workbench in his shop. The corners were worn, but the joints were still tight. He had kept it all that time. On the back, he wrote one sentence. Some things survive rough handling. I believe that now. Not everything. Not always. But enough to keep good time.